The 1996 NBA draft class ranks among the best ever. Tim Duncan, the basketball player, ranks among the best ever. Duncan was drafted in 1997, so those two facts have nothing to do with each other. But they could have. If not for an exceptionally unusual decision, Tim Duncan would have been in that 1996 draft class, and everything would be different. Tim Duncan's decision to stay in college was a big deal. This episode is presented by the Acura ADX, crafted for more. Duncan was always an unusual basketball prospect. Born and raised in the U.S. Virgin Islands, originally training to become a great swimmer like his Olympian sister, only to switch focus to hoops after Hurricane Hugo destroyed his local pool. It took happenstance and word of mouth for Wake Forest coach Dave Odom to find out about and then recruit Duncan in 1993. Odom said if Duncan were from the mainland, he'd have been the hottest recruit on earth. Duncan didn't stand out all that much his freshman year at Wake, a season he was initially supposed to redshirt, but by his sophomore season of 94-95, it was clear why Coach Odom thought that. Duncan broke out as one of the best players in the country. The 7-footer had perfect defensive timing, rock-solid footwork, and incredible touch around the basket. And to go with those famous fundamentals, Duncan had filled out his body, playing with more strength and aggression than ever before. Duncan led Wake to their best regular season finish in years and made them an NCAA tournament 1 seed. The Demon Deacons fell in the Sweet 16 against Bryant Big Country Reeves in Oklahoma State, but Duncan's numbers from that game are obscene. He outplayed one of the best big men in the country. Randolph Childress, a senior on that squad, had once been considered Wake's foremost pro prospect, but by the 95 offseason, Duncan had a lot of NBA eyes fixated on him and him alone. Here's where we need to mention another important part of Duncan's backstory. Tim's mother, Ione Duncan, died of breast cancer in 1990, just before Tim's 14th birthday. Before she passed, Ione made Tim's father, William, promise that all the Duncan siblings would finish their education. People knew this about Tim, but it wasn't really relevant until that sophomore season when everyone realized that Duncan had huge pro potential. That realization arrived at a critical juncture in draft history. Prior to that point, the NBA draft was typically, at one time explicitly, a place for college upperclassmen to join the league. Even decades after Spencer Haywood took the NBA to the Supreme Court, most draft classes included only a few underclassmen. Until 95. 95 was a pivotal draft. A bunch of sophomores declared, and they would end up becoming the top 4 picks. Number 5 was a high schooler. He turned out okay. Among all these hotshot underclassmen entering the draft, most of them big men, some NBA officials considered this hotshot underclassman big man the best of the best. That's right. People thought Duncan could have been the top pick in the 1995 draft, and that's not even the draft we're here to talk about. In any event, Duncan did not bite. He returned to Wake for his junior season. And that season was even better. Tim's numbers remained superb, and the Demon Deacons made it all the way to the Elite 8. Tim struggled in Wake's bruising elimination loss to Kentucky, but NBA people looked past that. Duncan remained a coveted prospect. And again, this was not for lack of competition from his peers. If 95 was the year underclassmen flooded the draft, 96 cemented the trend. That whole spring, colleges all over the country were mired in a game of will he stay or will he go with their best players. Almost all the big names decided to go. One after another, they threw their names into the draft. Juniors, sophomores, freshmen, quite a few of them would go on to greatness. And another straight to the pros high schooler turned out pretty well too. Hindsight helps emphasize the excellence of that 96 draft class, but even at the time you could tell it was stacked. And then there was Tim. Duncan's junior season ended with that Kentucky loss on March 23rd. He had from then until mid-May to mull the same decisions so many others were facing: stay or go. Duncan's version of the choice looked particularly straightforward. Just like 95, Duncan remained near the top of most draft boards, perhaps even number 1 overall. Nearly anyone in his shoes would turn pro without a second thought. But just like 95, people knew he had a unique set of priorities, and Duncan made it clear he was not going to make a quick decision. So even though this seemed like an obvious call to everyone else, let's run through both sides for Tim's sake. First, the obvious downsides of staying in college. In terms of future earnings, there was basically nothing to gain but so much to lose. Duncan could play worse, his team could falter, he could get hurt, he could have any number of strange things happen that might make him not the #1 pick in 1997. To assume that risk and forestall a guaranteed NBA paycheck again, basically nobody would choose that, let alone a projected top pick. So, those are the downsides to staying in college. The downsides to entering the league? I mean, maybe you end up on a team that sucks, but that's always a strong possibility. Maybe you miss college. College is fun, and it's gone forever once you go pro. There's nothing quite like being a college senior, and that's even without considering the basketball part. If Duncan left school after his junior season, he would lock in his college legacy as a great player who did not win big. And perhaps Tim would feel like he had broken a promise. Everyone knew about Ione Duncan's dying wish. Granted, Tim's mother didn't foresee that her son was going to become the best basketball prospect on the planet. And Tim could always finish his degree later. Guys do that all the time. Nobody would have held it against Duncan. Oh, I forgot I was supposed to be talking about the downsides of entering the draft. There just weren't a lot of downsides. It was an obvious choice. But we already knew Tim Duncan was a different kind of dude. He had made the unorthodox decision regarding the 1995 draft, and he dragged this 96 decision out until the last second. When reporters pressed Tim on the issue, he got a little ornery and then stopped speaking to media at all. So for over a month, the news cycle was just speculation, tidbits of context, and the word of Coach Odom, who was pondering his own future. People speculated about Duncan's peculiar motivations. Maybe he felt less financial pressure than others. Maybe he felt less pressure to escape the classroom. People saw that Duncan wasn't just getting a degree to say he did, but earnestly wanted to complete his undergraduate psychology major. Maybe Tim saw that the prior class of early entrants were having a less than perfect time in the NBA. I don't know. This sounds pretty patronizing. Coach Odom, who eventually signed his own extension, was the best source of intel for a while. He felt like Tim was going to stay because Tim expressed a lot of interest in the 96-97 Deacons roster. Why would he care so much if he was going to leave? But at the same time, the incentives to leave became clearer. On the college side of things, Wake's big man of the future had arrived. Loren Woods really didn't want people calling him the next Tim Duncan. That's not fair. But he was clearly set up to be Duncan's replacement. Some seniors might rather leave than stick around to mentor their replacement. On the NBA side, Duncan's status seemed to be crystallizing. At one time, they said he might be a top pick. Then they said maybe he's the top pick, but only if fellow excellent big man Marcus Camby stays in college. And then it was, okay, Camby's entering the draft, but everyone seems to prefer Duncan anyway. By May, you had Wayne Embry, GM of the Cleveland Cavaliers, a good team without a high draft pick, saying not only is this dude the #1 prospect, but we would trade vets for the top pick just to get him. By that point, nearly everyone else in question had made their call, and nearly all of them had chosen to enter the draft. So, what'll it be, Tim? April 30th, still no word. May 8th, even Tim's dad has no idea. May 10th, deadline is just over 24 hours away. Tim? Mum, he's busy taking his final exams. No word as of press time. Finally, at basically the last second, Tim Duncan made the call, with minimal fanfare. He had Wake Forest release his prepared statement, then spoke to reporters over the phone. He was staying. Duncan did not draw out the decision just to be annoying. He went back and forth, but ultimately decided during final exams that he wanted to take one last crack at a national title. He did have an insurance policy in case an injury hurt his prospects. And he wanted to finish that degree. Duncan intended to be a pro basketball player, but the pros would have to wait. The aftermath of this decision is compelling from so many angles. To start small, we can look at Duncan's stated reasons for staying. He wanted to win a national title. No dice. Relatively speaking, it was a down year for the Demon Deacons. Duncan also wanted to finish his psych degree. Dice. Duncan not only graduated, but co-authored this chapter of a psychology textbook. The man appears to have literally written the book on being an asshole. This is all very, very unusual for a college basketball superstar. And yet, this all panned out for him long-term as a basketball player, to say the least. Duncan did not get hurt or worse at basketball or whatever during his senior season, and he remained the clear-cut number one choice in 1997, when the San Antonio Spurs, a good team kind of taking a gap year while their superstar recovered from injury, won the lottery. Duncan spent the entirety of his 19-season career with the Spurs, formed perhaps the greatest player-coach bond in sports history with Greg Popovich, and accomplished basically everything it is possible to accomplish at an individual and team level. Things worked out extremely well, which makes the hypothetical alternatives so fascinating. If Duncan had entered the 96 draft, the Philadelphia 76ers would have had the first crack at picking him, and it sounds like they would have taken it. Without Duncan available, the Sixers evidently weren't too fond of Marcus Camby and instead used the first pick on a tiny point guard who became the face of the franchise and a future Hall of Famer. Imagine a world in which Allen Iverson was not drafted by the 76ers. Imagine if he started his career in, Toronto, Vancouver, Milwaukee, or if he got paired with Kevin Garnett in Minnesota instead of Stephon Marbury. Imagine how that might have rippled into the rest of the draft. Maybe Marbury and Ray Allen wouldn't have been traded for each other. What about Antoine Walker, Steve Nash, Peja? Would the Lakers have been able to trade for Kobe? The hypothetical butterfly effect of Tim Duncan just acting normal is wild. And what about Duncan himself? Imagine a world in which Duncan started his career a year earlier on the Sixers. Surely he would still be a great player, but Duncan's legacy isn't just greatness, it's stability. Same team, same coach for the long haul. If he landed in Philly, who knows? Do their coach and GM end up sticking around for 2 decades? Do they become a dynasty around Duncan? I don't know. Probably not exactly the same way. Meanwhile, without Duncan arriving at the perfect time, Popovich might very well be something other than the greatest coach in NBA history. He and David Robinson might not have ever won a single title. What is that world like? How does this shape the careers of Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili? What about Kawhi Leonard? What about Fabrizio Oberto? What would become of Fabrizio? We will never know, because on May 11th, 1996, Tim Duncan did what almost nobody else on earth would have and said, yeah, I know everyone in the NBA wants to hand me millions of dollars right now, but I would rather stay in college, accept the risk, and focus on my studies. A unique dude made a unique decision. All the ripple effects and hypotheticals are for the rest of us to worry about. For Tim, a big deal decision worked out perfectly. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to check out Secret Base's Patreon if you haven't. And if you're sticking around on YouTube, you can check out some more stuff about the ripple effects of this Tim Duncan decision. Okay, that's it. Bye.